Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to the Education Outreach and Community Science Part 1 session. If you like the topics of this session, then you may be especially interested in Invasive Species Awareness Week, which is happening at the end of this month. The Canadian Partner Group has several free resources and events you can attend throughout the week to learn more about invasive species and how to prevent the spread. If that's of interest, then definitely feel free to check out our website to learn more. With that, I'll pass it over to your moderator, Emily, who is our Program Development Coordinator at the ISC. She's our go-to lady for all things spotted lanternfly and climate change, and she also does a lot of work to support municipal action and on our monthly webinar series. So thanks, Em. I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much, Maddie. Really happy to be moderating this session. And since, of course, we are talking about community science this afternoon, I do want to just promote our community science program, which, of course, aims to connect all of our ISC and partner opportunities and resources in one handy spot so you can connect to the initiatives that interest you the most. So simple as joining, learning, and taking action through one of the many ongoing community science initiatives. You can, of course, visit the community science program webpage on our website to learn more. So our first presenter today is ISC's own Liana Hryniewicz. Liana, I'll have you come on, and she's presenting on Asian carp today.
Thanks so much. I'm going to share my screen and just feel free to interrupt if for some reason you guys can't see it. Just share it. Okay, hopefully you're able to see that okay.
Yeah, we can see it full screen.
Perfect. As I mentioned, my name is Liana Hryniewicz. I am the Aquatic Program at the Invasive Species Center. And today I'm going to be talking about the Asian Carp Canada program and giving an update on the program and how we use innovative tools to drive invasive species awareness and prevention. So the Invasive Species Center is a non-for-profit organization that mobilizes action against invasive species that harm the environment, economy, and society. So a couple things that I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about what our program does, some of the recent captures of the past year, and how we use an audience-targeted survey to drive some of our digital outreach campaigns and influencer marketing, and then also benefits of expanding your platforms and the benefits of that. So the Asian Carp Canada program was created to bring together information on the most recent prevention technologies, early warning measures, response efforts, and the overall threat of Asian carp to the Great Lakes and beyond. Due to grass carp being the most immediate threat to the Canadian waters of the Great Lakes, the program is focusing on spreading the word on grass carp identification and reporting, along with the impacts they would cause if they were to establish in the Canadian waters of the Great Lakes. On the screen is a few ways that we do that, and we will dive further into that in this presentation. And this work is done collaboratively by Canada, the Invasive Species Center, the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, the Toronto Zoo, the Royal Ontario Museum, the Quebec MFFP, and the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association. So I'll just quickly highlight the 3 grass carp that were captured in the 2023 season. On June 20th, a sterile male was caught by DFO in the Grand River. On July 3rd, a fertile female was caught in the Bay of Quinte by a commercial fisher. And on August 16th, a sterile male was caught in Fort Erie, Ontario by an angler. So for us, seeing that the angler was responsible for one of these captures is a huge success because our main target audience is anglers and our main call to action is identification and reporting of grass carp. So seeing that an angler was able to do this successfully is really validating in some of the work that we do. As mentioned, our #1 target audience is anglers, as they're often the first set of eyes out on the water. By running a survey, we can analyze our audience each year and gain knowledge on what they are learning, what areas we need to focus our outreach on, and most importantly, how and where they like to receive their information, so we could be sure to frequent those areas as well. So the most effective way we have found to do this is through a survey. We created a survey using SurveyMonkey that includes questions on grass carp, including their biology and their invasion status. We also included questions on where the audience likes to go for fishing information, what platforms they like to use, and who they trust for their information. And most importantly, we also include an incentive of a $100 gift card to Bass Pro Shop to encourage entries along with boosting advertising on our social media. So this led to almost 2,000 entries for the survey last year. And as you can imagine, that's extremely helpful to guide our work for the rest of the year. So I'll quickly go over a couple questions from the survey to show how we analyze this information to guide our work for the following year. As mentioned earlier, our main call to action is to inform anglers how to identify and report a grass carp if they were to spot or catch one. This question shows us that we need to continue to prioritize this call to action and continue to get the yes answer higher than the no. We're running this survey again in the next couple of weeks, so I'm really interested to see how this answer compares over the last year after the outreach efforts this year. So we'll continue to drive anglers to the identification and reporting guide for grass carp on our website through our organic social media posts, our advertising campaigns, our influencer work, and other campaigns, because as this shows, that's something that we should continue to prioritize. This question asks, what platforms are you most likely to use when looking for information related to fishing? This question helps guide our work in knowing where our audience is going the most for fish information. By seeing where they go the most, we can ensure that our messaging frequently visits these places as well. So government websites is number one, which is actually a very interesting response. But we're glad to see that it is, as this is where the most accurate and legal information, such as regulations, comes from. I was thinking maybe they wanted to answer the right question to win that gift card, even though that would have nothing to do with it. But still good to see that that's where people are going to. Social media is number two, which is also good because we gear most of our outreach work on social media between our organic content, our paid content, and those campaigns. And newsletters is number three. So each year we continue to include our messaging in a couple of different fishing newsletters, and they often have great engagement and drive people back to our website. So if we include our link to the identification and reporting guide for grass carp in the newsletter, we can drive anglers to that webpage, and we can hopefully increase the amount of anglers that know how to identify and report grass carp in Ontario, and to get that survey again higher for the yeses than the nos. Another question, we also include which social media platform they would most likely go to fishing information. Facebook is number one by a lot here. I'm not surprised about that. Each year we post on Facebook, we boost posts on Facebook, and that increases our reach on Facebook. So this shows that we should continue to do so and continue to prioritize our audience on Facebook. This also encourages us to find ways that we can expand on Facebook. So this might include posting into fishing groups and pages, or finding influencers with high Facebook following, even expanding onto Facebook short form videos. YouTube is number two here. So lots of influencers also post on YouTube that we work with, especially in the fishing world. Influencers often document their fishing trips or techniques on YouTube. So luckily for us, it's not super tricky to find fishing influencers over in YouTube or that cross between platforms onto there as well. So as we can see here, we should continue to prioritize YouTube as well. And then the last question in the survey that's usually included after this one is a blank space where people can leave who they watch the most or what specific channels they go to the most. And after this, we compile a big Excel document with all these and look to see which ones come up the most frequently. This has been extremely beneficial in guiding our strategy, and will continue to do so to guide our work through the following fiscal year in the most effective way. Once the survey is complete, we take our time to thoroughly analyze the responses and use that to create an advertising strategy for the following year. I'll go over a few partnerships from the past 2 years and how we used the survey to guide these partnerships as well. So Ashley Ray was one of the first influencers that we worked with. We decided to work with her again this past year because our first partnership with her was very successful. She has a large following across all of her platforms, including TikTok. So expanding onto TikTok was an important goal for us last year. So finding an influencer that also crosses over onto TikTok, and especially an existing partnership, was great. So Ashley recorded herself at the Toronto Zoo exhibit, which not only reached audiences about grass carp prevention, but also promoted the exhibit at the Toronto Zoo. Also, Ashley has a very large following on Facebook, and as we learned, we should continue to prioritize influencers who actually have a large following on Facebook. Atlas is an online fishing forum that provides detailed maps and content to the members. This membership is free and reaches audiences all over Canada. Anglers Atlas is great to work with to reach our newsletter demographic, and they have the ability to target their newsletters to specific areas in Canada. So since our main target audience is Great Lakes focused, we were able to target this specific newsletter to over 40,000 Ontario anglers. At the bottom of the screen, if you're able to see there, it shows a spike in page views on the day that the newsletter was sent out. So this really validates that it did work. It did drive people who received this newsletter to our website, and specifically to the Identification Reporting Guide for Grass Carp, again, which will hopefully get that survey, up and encourage people to learn how to identify and report the species. As I mentioned, they're able to geo-target their newsletters to specific areas. We do have a info session coming up in Belleville, and we do have a couple more campaigns coming out with Anglers Atlas. So one of them is that they were able to target people in the Belleville area and surrounding to get the word out about our info session as well. So that's another way that newsletters can actually be really beneficial in that sense. Chris Johnson is a bass angler who fishes in the Bassmaster Elite Series, different from other influencers because he's more of a tournament angler rather than a traditional influencer. He still has a large following, but has the ability to reach different audiences due to his presence in tournaments in North America. So along with this work on Instagram, which featured a reel, important for us to prioritize reels on Instagram as the algorithm prioritizes that. He was also able to produce a YouTube video. His YouTube video was about his top bass fishing spots in Ontario, which drew viewers to the video due to it being relative to his brand. But then he ended the video with grass carp information on common lookalikes, reporting, and how a grass carp invasion would have impacts on bass fishing. So it was a great way to maintain our presence on YouTube, as we learned from this survey, and keep our work relative to the brand of the person we're working with, but also get our messaging across. Average Ontario Anglers is a new partnership from this year. They're based out of the Great Lakes region in Canada, and thus has a following that is heavily in that area, right in our target demographic. They were able to do some important work with us to reach our target audience and produce really high quality content for us, including those Instagram reels that I mentioned that Instagram is favoring at the moment. Fish TV was also a new partnership for us this year. They have a very large following across platforms, including a heavy Facebook presence. So it's really important for us to work with them. We had a bit of a different partnership with Fish TV. We actually fully created all of the content for them, and they would just post our content onto their platform. So often with our partnerships, the influencer is the one creating the program, or sorry, creating the partnership with our key messaging. However, in this case, we created the posts with the graphics for them, and they posted it for us. So it kind of limited a little bit of editing time and review time, and allowed for us to get a lot more content out over the past few months. And it's also worth mentioning, it's important to stay consistent posting on your own social media. All the influencer and paid work definitely drives followers to your page. So it's important to stay consistent on your own social media, organic and paid ads as well. So you can see in the highlighted area here, that's the difference between the paid ads versus the non-paid ads. They offer a much larger reach. Not always a positive thing as people are seeing it whether they want to or not, but nevertheless, it's getting the word across to new followers. Now, in terms of platform expansions, it's important to work with, continue working with influencers and engaging on our social media platforms that we already do, but it is important to look for new platforms that our target audience is also using. So television was brought up in our survey as a way that people like to get information about fishing. The Fishing Canada show was the most mentioned one on the survey, and lucky for us, we already had a really good partnership with them from last year. This past August, we filmed an episode with the Fishing Canada show on grass carp impacts. The episode will have fishing in Ontario, and then they will dive into the impacts grass carp would cause if they were to establish in Canada. So big thank you to DFO for the interview and for working the boat to show viewers the work that's put in each year to monitor for these fish. The episode does air on March 9th at 8 a.m. on Global TV, the Sportsman Channel, and on Friday at 6 p.m. on the World Fishing Network in the US. Podcasts was also something we dove into a little bit last year and this year. As mentioned, we established a partnership with the Fishing Canada show, who also hosts the Outdoor Journal radio show. Last year, we ran live ads in all of their podcasts, which entailed the host talking about grass carp, impacts to fishing, and how to report them. Live ads experienced less skips than pre-recorded ads, as it's organically talked about by the hosts and incorporated. I was also a guest on a couple of podcasts here, so we were able to have full episodes where we talked about it. And then, as mentioned earlier, we worked with the Average Ontario Anglers, who also recorded a podcast where they talked about their frightening fishing fears. And one of their fishing fears would be an establishment of grass carp in Canadian waters. So it was nice to see how they incorporated it more organically there. It really didn't sound like an ad. It was really interesting to hear how they fit it in there, and interesting to hear the difference between the two and how they're both beneficial in their own way. So we'll definitely continue to find ourselves in the podcast world. And lastly, we expanded onto a new platform called FishBrain, similar to a social media platform, kind of like Facebook, but it's completely geared to fishing. So people can upload their fishing photos and tag baits that they use. So we created a page under the Invasive Species Center where we talk about aquatic invasives and primarily grass carp. Although it's our most recent platform, we actually have the highest number of followers on this account, and our engagement is extremely positive. So it really goes to show that narrowing down your target audience and finding those niche places will benefit in getting your message across. So
Hey, Liana, you just have a minute and a half left.
Sounds good, thanks. Here, influencer marketing is definitely something we are going to continue to do year after year. If establishing a good partnership with an influencer, there's nothing wrong with working them again. It definitely go both ways in a beneficial partnership. It's also important to continue to keep your eye open to platforms that are niche to your target audience. For us, that was FishBrain. It's a completely used platform for fishing, so it's definitely important to keep eye for things like that. Television was also that for us. As we know, there's lots of television shows about fishing. Keeping up with your own organic content and keeping it simple is really important, and also keeping an eye on emerging trends such as TikTok, podcasting, Instagram Reels, short form video, and finding out how your niche is using those platforms. And to finish us off, I'm going to really quickly plug our grass carp information session. If you are in the Belleville area or somewhere close, we are having an information session on grass carp on Wednesday, February 28th at 6 p.m. at the Belleville and District Fishing Game Club. We're going to have swim partners and presentations from Fisheries and Oceans Canada, along with a panel for Q&A. So I could leave the link to this information session in the chat if anyone is curious to join. And that's all. Thanks.
Amazing. Thanks so much again, Liana, for kicking off a session for us with that presentation. I don't think I see anything in the Q&A. So it doesn't look like we have questions. So maybe I will move forward with Cassie Russell's presentation. Cassie is coming to us from the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs.
Thanks for the introduction, Emily, and I'm hoping that everyone can see my slides there.
We can see it fine, thanks.
Perfect. Okay, so as Emily mentioned, my name is Cassie Russell. I'm with the OMAFRA, as we commonly abbreviate it. And today I'm going to be covering kind of how we monitor for invasive pest species in Ontario, more specifically from a nursery perspective. All right. And to get us started, I kind of wanted to clarify what I mean when I use the term nursery, because a lot of folks tend to think of, maybe your local garden center or the Home Depot that has a big sign that says nursery. What I'm talking about when I refer to nursery, that I'm looking at farms like this. So large farms that are producing, propagating, and growing woody and herbaceous ornamental plants to sell to those garden centers, landscapers, or even be used in landscape planting or conservation efforts. And the nursery sector in Ontario is quite large in itself. So just from some 2022 Stats Canada data, there were 582 nurseries in Ontario, covering about 19,000 acres of land. And a lot of those nurseries are concentrated kind of around the region of Hamilton and Hamilton, Niagara, and the North Shores of Lake Erie. Sorry, I know my camera always freezes. So hopefully that's a bit better there. Okay, so over the last 20 years, Landscape Ontario, specifically the nursery grower sector group, has been pooling their resources to run a scouting program for the farms and sharing that information with each other and with OMAFRA. And before I get ahead of myself, I want to quickly acknowledge Dr. Janine West with Landscape Ontario. It's Janine who really takes on the running of this program on behalf of the growers group. So each year, Landscape Ontario hires a dedicated scout from May to September who's trained and visits numerous Ontario farms, either weekly or bi-weekly. And where OMAFRA or myself comes in is supporting with the training of those scouts each year, as well as aggregating that information that's shared, that's gleaned from the different nursery visits and sharing that a little bit more broadly with our stakeholders. And I get this question a lot: what does a scout actually do? So in our case with the nursery scout, they're making regular visits at each nursery through the season. They're coming to each nursery as a fresh set of highly trained eyes. So they're knowing what to look for and taking detailed notes. helping the growers understand what's happening on their farms. Oh, sorry, I went too fast there. When the scout visits the nursery, they're looking mainly for signs and symptoms of pest, disease, or any sort of other abnormalities, but also looking for indicators like growth stages or good things like the density of beneficial organisms at a nursery. And this scouting that's part of a nursery plan is a really critical part to any sort of integrated pest management program. It serves both as an early warning system for when pests are starting to build up, but also serves as a really important record-keeping tool to evaluate the successes or the failures of any sort of IPM strategies. And these records are really critical for a number of nurseries that are on prevention control plans or pest modules for certain regulated species. And the nursery sector acknowledges that they do have a pretty important part to play in helping to limit the spread of invasive species. And in doing that, a number of nurseries throughout Ontario, as well as throughout Canada, are on certain certification programs. So these programs, such as CNCP or the Clean Plants program, are in place to ensure that invasive or regulated pests are not being moved to new areas through the Plants for Planting pathway. Some examples of pests with specific modules include box tree moth, spongy moth, Japanese beetle, and boxwood blight. And because most of these pests are already present and established in the landscape surrounding nurseries, it's quite a challenge for those nurseries to stay pest-free. So with the prevention and management tools that they have in place, it can be really helpful information for those growers to know where these pests are in the landscape surrounding the nurseries and when those certain periods of activity are for those pests. So that leads us to think, well, we have a really highly trained scout that's going into the field each day, already scouting for invasive species in the nursery. What if we can expand their scouting beyond what's just growing in the nursery and out into the surrounding landscape and help growers with that information, but also be an extra set of trained eyes on the ground for scouting for high-risk invasives and regulated pests. So with that in mind, Landscape Ontario applied and was successful in receiving some of the Invasive Species Action Fund, which enabled them to expand the scouting areas. And again, just not only focus on scouting nurseries, but some of the surrounding areas. So this by no means is an extensive list of the only invasive species we were monitoring for through the program. This is just to highlight a few that we took some extra time to scout for this season with the additional funding. And I'm going to cover a few of these today in my little talk here. Starting off with spotted lanternfly, of course. So I'm going to operate on the assumption that most of the audience are quite familiar with spotted lanternfly as we prepare for its eventual arrival to Canada. Well, spotted lanternfly has not been detected in Ontario, in Canada yet. There have been numerous sightings and interceptions. So the threat is very real. It's very close. And spotted lanternfly is known for its preference of tree of heaven and grapes, but can feed on over 70 known host plants, many of which are very commonly grown in Ontario nurseries, as well as present in our landscape. So poses a pretty big concern there. And because of this, in addition to likely becoming a public nuisance pest in the landscape once established, spotted lanternfly is likely going to have some pretty big implications and regulatory burdens associated with it for the nurseries that are going to have to make sure they're shipping clean plants free of spotted lanternfly. It's also worth noting there are a number of limitations to being able to manage this pest effectively. We have a lack of effective chemical controls, and in the US, they've seen pretty low levels of natural predation so far. So right now, the name of the game is prevention and catching this pest early to limit the spread as much as we can while we wait for the science to catch up. And to give you a sense of how imminent this threat is, this is a map of the US where spotted lanternfly has now been found, which I believe is over 17 states. And we unfortunately have a few populations bordering us on a few different sides. And we're especially concerned with this buffalo population here I've circled. It's extremely close to our Niagara border. As mentioned, we have a high proportion of nursery producers in the Niagara region, and of course, a booming wine and grape and tourism industry that are all at risk from this invader. So at Amafra last year, we secured some funding to get a large supply of trapping materials that we then distributed to growers, research partners, other folks in the green industry. And the Landscape Ontario Nursery Scout was in charge of checking and changing a good portion of these traps that were part of our larger network pictured here. So with our limited supply of resources, we strategically tried to prioritize the Golden Horseshoe area and high-risk areas in close proximity to the Buffalo location. So don't mind the differences in the colors of the pins on the map. They don't mean anything for our purposes here. All in all, our network had around 160 traps and the surveillance locations that were monitored through the summer and into the fall. And we are happy to report we had no finds of spotted lanternfly, neither through the Nursery Scout activities nor through any of our Amafra survey locations. One big positive thing from this expansion of the scouting outside of just the nursery production areas was we noticed definitely an improved engagement and awareness of this pest among neighboring farms and business, as well as clients of the nursery. And so those folks can now be an extra set of eyes looking out for these invaders. And to give you a really quick visual, this is what our traps and our network looked like. We're using the tree bands pictured there. Unfortunately, they're just a passive trap with no attraction component, and they're only going to catch spotted lanternfly if they're already there. And we've been recommending to select trees for traps specifically in high traffic areas, so near rail yards or other transportation corridors, also in popular tourism spots such as parking lots where you might get a lot of US traffic. Excuse me. And we're mainly banding trees that are high on the spotted lanternfly preference list. So obviously tree of heaven, but also black walnut, maples, and others. And if you could see in the last photo, we also pair our tree bands with these info tags to serve as that form of education and outreach component. And the tags have the different life stages of spotted lanternfly from eggs to adults, as well as the timing that those stages are present. And we also include a QR code that takes the person to our resource page. And we track hits on those QR codes to help us get a sense of the engagement we're getting from some of our bands and at some of our surveillance sites. Okay, wanted to move on to a couple of other pests. So on from spotted lanternfly, the next one I want to talk about is box tree moth and how we're learning to live with this new invasive in Ontario. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with box tree moth, it was first detected in Toronto in 2018. And over the last few years, it has spread through Ontario, recently into Quebec and the Maritimes, and also now in some US states as well. It's originally from Asia, but invaded Europe almost 20 years ago, and is now can now be found in over 30 European countries. And as for North America, we don't have native boxwood here like they do in Europe, but it is a very common shrub found in the landscape, and for many holds pretty significant value. The box tree moth, it's a little voracious caterpillar that can go pretty easily unnoticed at first, but as you can see, so there's some photos of the larva on the bottom. They can cause quite a bit of damage, and there are some photos showing the various degrees of damage they cause. And if left unmanaged for multiple seasons, it has the potential to completely defoliate boxwoods in the landscape, like shown on the picture on the right. However, it's important to know that we do actually have tools available to use, and those tools paired with the right amount of education means that devastation can be avoidable and treatable if you did want to keep boxwoods in your landscape. Now, in terms of scouting for box tree moth, most if not all growers are very diligently managing this pest within the nursery since it is a regulated pest. So this year, having that ability to get the scout to look outside the nursery and monitor more of the surrounding boxwood was really helpful for being able to better understand the pest biology and collect key information like timings of flight periods and optimal management windows that we can then share more broadly. And I'll touch a little bit on this later, but essentially any sort of the information we're gathering through the scout and other folks who send us monitoring information that gets further communicated throughout the green industry to growers through email blasts, as well as on the nursery crops blog. And this is just kind of an example of the information we're collecting and how we're developing it into recommendations, not just for growers, but landscapers, arborists, home gardeners, master gardeners, really anyone who wants to monitor and manage box tree moth in the landscape. So we develop resources like this from the information the scout collects. And moving on to another pest I want to talk about, which is one we unexpectedly came across this year in our scouting program, and that is the invasive elm zigzag softfly. Now, this invasive insect was first noticed in 2020 around the Quebec-Ontario border from, I believe, a citizen science detection, and it's continued to expand through Quebec and Ontario, and now has been found in a few US states as far down south as North Carolina. And this summer, the Nursery Scout found evidence of this pest in the landscape, and that was our first known detection of this pest in the Greater Toronto region. And very, very soon after we made this discovery, we also started seeing reports of this pest on iNaturalist, also in the GTA, which prompted us to kind of expand our scouting a little bit more widely. And lo and behold, we found it in Guelph, where I am, a little bit west of us too. So safe to say it is spreading through the province. There's another talk on elm zigzag softfly later on in the week, so I'll leave the biology to be covered there. But that said, we're still very much in the early stages of this invasion. There's still a lot of information to be gathered in terms of periods of activity of this pest, and as well as the threat that this pest poses, not only to the nursery sector, but the landscape. And here we have some photos taken of the elm zigzag softfly from our wonderful scout this past summer. On the left, you have those diagnostic zigzag patterns observed from the young larvae feeding. And as they grow, the patterns become a little less obvious. You can see that on the top, on the photos on the right there. And then if you look in the top middle photo, that is a photo of the pupal casing, another distinguishing feature of the species. I didn't include a photo of the adult here. Really, what you're most likely going to encounter are either the larva, the damage, or the pupal casings. So those would be the things that I would suggest to look out for. And the last two pests I'm going to skim over really quickly in the interest of time. So we have Hemlock woolly Adelgid, lots of talks, already one earlier today and for the rest of the week. So excited to tune in to learn more about those. But essentially, this is a pest that the nursery sector is also very much aware of and tracking and making sure that they stay free from it. For this pest, we're mainly relying on visual inspections through our scouting, looking for them when they're at the most obvious stages. So looking for the egg sacs, which is kind of November to May is the ideal period for monitoring, but we kind of focus in our monitoring right when the snow melts, so between March and May. And we are happy to report we did not come across any Hemlock woolly Adelgid in our scouting program this year. It's important to note we did have some limitations with our surveying while we scout, or we rely primarily on visual inspections, and we also didn't get the additional funding until kind of right at the tail end of the optimal time to scout. So we didn't spend a ton of time monitoring for this outside of the nursery, but inside of the nursery, this is very much part of our regular pest monitoring program. It's always the first pest on the scouts' radar when they're starting to scout in May. So essentially the focus for this pest for us is really just ensuring nursery stock is clean and that the nursery pathway is doing its part in ensuring they're not contributing to the further spread of this pest around the province. Okay, last pest really briefly to cover here, taking a bit of a break from the bugs, it's oak wilt. Again, lots of talks coming up on oak wilt this week, so just a really brief update from our program. Happy to report that our nursery scout did not come across any oak wilt this year, neither in nurseries nor around nurseries. The nursery sector is very concerned about oak wilt and ensuring they do their part to protect trees and maintain oaks in the landscape. And the scouting program, again, gave some opportunity to engage with stakeholders we reach and share critical information such as prevention strategies around pruning, moving wood, and where to report suspected cases of oak wilt. And we did and are still doing a lot of outreach education and training to support not only growers, but stakeholders too, in terms of knowing the difference between oak wilt and some of the other more common, less threatening issues like frost damage or anthracnose, and making sure folks know when to report something. And I want to wrap up my talk here by sharing how we do a lot of that outreach or education and communicate the information collected through the Nursery Scout program. And that is through the On Nursery Crops blog. So this blog has information and articles mostly geared to the nursery sector, but we have over 1,300 subscribers that includes folks like landscapers, master gardeners, arborists, other professionals in the green industry, or even just folks wanting to learn more about landscape plants and their pests. So when we develop training resources or host workshops or have any other timely updates to share through the season, this is usually where we post those. And a lot of the critical in-season information collected by the Scout goes up in the form of pest updates. And these pest updates are almost always the most viewed articles posted on the blog, usually getting about 1,200 article opens right when they're posted, and reaching into the thousands when we get help from other organizations like ISA and Landscape Ontario, who will further share the articles with their members. And again, the majority of this information in the updates are coming directly from the Landscape Ontario Summer Scout, enabling us to communicate issues that they come across, a lot of the times with invasive species and other critical topics, and communicate those to a much wider audience beyond just who is a part of the Scout program. And I'll leave everyone with the QR code to the Nursery Crops blog, as well as my contact information if you have questions or want to reach out. Again, I just wanted to say a really big thank you to Janine West from Landscape Ontario, who runs the program. I just get to do the fun things like give the talks about it. And also the Invasive Species Action Fund for allowing us to expand the program this year, as well as our 2023 Nursery Scout, Cassie, who collected a lot of the critical information and contributed a lot of awesome photos for the presentation today. So with that, if I have a minute or two, I'd be happy to take some questions.
Sure, yeah, thanks so much, Cassie. We do have just over a minute, and I think we have just 2 questions in the Q&A right now, so I think I'll kind of wrap them into one. And so I guess, are you scouting for invasive plants, and are you scouting or addressing jumping worms?
Those are both really great questions. I'd say that the majority of our scouting is focused on pests. That said, our growers are very much aware of invasive plants, and weeds are usually being managed by herbicides in the nursery. But yeah, when we were outside of the nursery looking in the landscapes, we were mainly focusing on pests that are regulated, so insects and diseases. And in terms of jumping worms, it's definitely something that's on our radar. Jumping worms aren't regulated in nursery, to my knowledge, and I could be wrong on that, sorry. But there are best management practices available for growers. It's something that is coming up on our radar. We're inundated with stuff on spotted lanternfly and box tree moth. It's hard to manage it all, but jumping worms are definitely on our radar too. So great question.
For sure. Okay, well, thank you so much. And we'll pass things on to our next speaker. So next up, we have Derissa Vincentini, who is going to be speaking to us a bit more on Hemlock woolly Adelgid. Derissa, you can go ahead and share your screen. I am also just going to give everyone a verbal reminder that if you have any questions for the speakers, please type them into the Q&A box, and I will read those out loud for them to answer at the end of their presentations.
Thanks, Emily. Just making sure that you can see that. All right, awesome. So as mentioned, my name is Derissa Vincentini, and I am the Community Science Coordinator at the Invasive Species Center. Today, I'm going to be talking about a project that uses a novel approach to community science for monitoring for Hemlock woolly Adelgid in Ontario. This was really a collaborative effort between partners, including Dr. Chris McQuarrie and Victoria Derry from the Canadian Forest Service, as well as Dr. Erin Campbell and Nicole Mielewczyk from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And my slides, there we go. All right, perfect. So firstly, Hemlock woolly Adelgid, which I will be referring to as HWA, is a tiny sap-sucking aphid-like insect that feeds on nutrient and water-filled tissue at the base of hemlock needles. It is found in both Eastern and Western Canada and US. However, Eastern hemlock are more susceptible to HWA than the varieties found in British Columbia. So generally, you won't see the insects themselves on the trees, but you will see the waxy wool-like ovisacs that kind of look like the tip of a Q-tip or a mini cotton swab right at the base of that needle. Other signs and symptoms, especially of heavily infestations, are premature dieback, thinning grayish crowns, and discolored foliage. So there are 3 regulated areas in southeastern Ontario between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. And in 2022, there were an additional 3 detections outside of these areas, 2 south of Lake Ontario, and then 1 north of Lake Ontario, which is concerning as this is getting closer to larger, more continuous forests and hemlock stands. In March of 2023, just while we were preparing for this project, there was a new detection in Hamilton as well. So there are many different ways to monitor for HWA. Each method involves a different amount of energy, resources, manpower, time, and expertise. For our community science project this year, we focused on 2 methods, and that's visual surveying and then kind of like a dual trap that does interception as well as eDNA. So there are challenges to monitoring for HWA, including that it spreads long distances by a migratory bird pathway, which is obviously difficult to regulate. But as a result of this, it is often first introduced to a new stand in the crown of the trees. This makes early detection of such a small insect very difficult, and often detections are made kind of once there's already crown dieback from the infestation. In Ontario, there is also limited knowledge of hemlock distribution in comparison to other tree species. This is in part due to the species not being perceived as economically valuable. There's also less hemlock concentration on the landscape compared to other species. And much of the hemlock is located on private property, making it difficult to access. So to address these challenges, the HWA Monitoring Network piloted a community science eDNA project. So using community science to better understand HWA distribution in Ontario, how did we do that? Through the HWA Monitoring Network, we provided a summary of different tools, resources, and methods available to monitoring for HWA, so landowners and managers can make the best decisions with the resources that they have available. We also piloted the use of novel eDNA traps and community science as an additional tool in this toolbox. So firstly, what is eDNA? Environmental DNA is genetic material that is shed into the environment by living or dead organisms that can then be analyzed for the detection of that organism. If you want to learn more about that, there's a special session tomorrow. So to capture eDNA of HWA, we used a method developed by Dr. Charlene Partridge and Meg Sanders at Grand Valley State University. And if you are interested, Charlene will be presenting in that special session on eDNA tomorrow morning on developing this method. So be sure to catch that and learn more. But essentially, it's this 3D printed orange disc trap that you're looking at now. And it holds 4 microscope slides that are dipped in petroleum jelly. The jelly is capable of trapping both the insects themselves during their mobile stages, as well as DNA in the environment, such as wool fragments that are dispersed by the wind. So this is essentially a smaller version of the green sticky trap, if you're familiar with that. And it's used as an interception trap, but it has minimal bycatch because the surface is much smaller, and it's also less sticky. So this dual eDNA interception trap method is also less time intensive and relatively inexpensive compared to some other monitoring methods. Additionally, limited knowledge and expertise are required to use this trap, making it a great candidate for community science, which allows us to also gain access to private areas. So there are 2 methods of assessing these traps, including visual inspection of the microscope slides, as well as the eDNA molecular analysis of the petroleum jelly, which increases the likelihood of detection at smaller and younger infestations. So we started by putting out a call for volunteers to deploy these traps in their woodlots or the forests that they manage. The only criteria was that they had to have a hemlock tree. In a short time, we received 80 requests for traps, but we only had 50 to give out for the pilot last year. So we wanted to focus on the most immediate at-risk areas and complement surveying being done by Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So that was kind of how we decided who was receiving a trap in 2023 and kind of drew this arbitrary line and then narrowed it down from there. We invited all trap recipients to join us for a workshop to learn more about HWA, how to set up their traps, how the traps work themselves, as well as other methods for monitoring their trees and forests, such as ball sampling and visual inspections. We also visited already infested forests so participants could learn how to ID Hemlock woolly adelgid and then practice biosecurity protocols to prevent the spread to new areas. So trap recipients and volunteers were also asked to use community science HWA survey developed by the CFA using Survey 123. So this is essentially just like a survey form that you can, and through an app on your phone, and then you visually assess your hemlocks and type all the information in, and you can take pictures and things like that. So you can check it out using the QR code there. Anyone can use the survey to survey any hemlocks. It's free and there's no sign up required. So the time commitment from trap recipients is quite minimal, which is great for recruiting volunteers. We ask them to set up the traps like you see in that picture under a hemlock tree at the end of April and then leave it there until the end of June. So targeting a 2-month period in the spring. We also asked them to periodically go back to ensure it was still intact, not tampered with, blown over or anything like that. So this 2-month period where the traps were deployed is to capture the most mobile stage of Hemlock woolly adelgid. At this time, their eggs that overwintered are hatching, and then the insects are then crawling around in their crawler stage. So they're potentially getting blown off and then sticking to the trap. These crawlers will then start to produce wool to get ready to lay more eggs going through that second generation. And when they produce wool in the spring for that second generation, they don't pack it as tightly. So it's a lot more loose because it doesn't need to protect the eggs over winter. So that increases the chances of catching wool on the trap as well. So 50 traps went out, and in their trap kit, they also received hardware to attach it to some sort of post supplied by the volunteer. If they did attend the workshop, we did supply some posts. They were optional. They received the Falcon tubes with the dipped microscope slides in them. There's 2 slides per tube, and that's because they're dipped together so that only one side has the petroleum jelly on it. They received 2 sets of gloves, one for setup and one for takedown, a sign that explained what the trap is to anyone who might just happen upon it in the forest, a protocol and a field data sheet, and then a return mailing envelope. In June, volunteers needed to place the microscope slides back in the tubes the way that they found them, and then send those back to us. They keep everything else, disinfect their trap and hardware, and store it until the following season. And then the following year, so this spring, we will just be sending them refill kits with just the Falcon tubes and slides. So 50 traps went out. We received 44 back, which I think is a pretty good ratio for a piloted year of community science program. And a lot of the reasons were, some of them, the slides were broken and they didn't let us know because we could have sent replacement slides. So one, the trap was actually stolen. Don't know where it went. And then others, didn't find the time in their field season, couldn't find their hemlock tree that they thought they had. And one person just wished to no longer participate. So once we received the samples, the ISC and NRCan visually inspected the microscope slides under a microscope for HWA. So on the left, all of the black specks that you see on the slide are actually adelgid insects. And once that is complete, then all of that petroleum jelly is scraped off into passion bead tubes and sent to CFA for the molecular eDNA analysis. So results, I should mention that we also included positive and negative field and lab controls, which all performed as expected, which is great. And then during visual analysis of the microscope slides, one sample had many suspect adelgids on it. And then we also had another sample that was installed improperly, but had one suspect adelgid possibly on the edge. So the petroleum jelly was facing down rather than up. And that one suspect was right on the edge of the microscope slide. So it was kind of difficult to tell. Might be HWA, might not be. But in both instances, as soon as those were identified during visual analysis, CFA was notified right away for a ground inspection of the area. And as a result, the one suspect sample with multiple Adelgid on the slide was made a positive detection confirmed by CFAA. The other one could not be confirmed on the ground. So there are two possibilities for that. Again, it was an improperly installed slide. So there might not be any HWA. It could be something else. And it's just the way that it was kind of shoved between the microscope slide and like really in the petroleum jelly. It just looked like it could be, but it could be a lookalike. Another theory is that it could be HWA, but the infestation level is so low that ground inspections couldn't pick anything up. But if the slides were installed right side up, they might have picked something else up. So the trap will be deployed again in that area this year, so we'll see the results. I should note that eDNA did not pick anything up on that slide either. So now there is a new known HWA population in Haldimand County, the bottom left there on the map, as a result of this project. And since then, there has been a detection in Lincoln, Ontario as well. So conclusions and lessons learned. The HWA monitoring network increased early detection of HWA with one positive detection that may have otherwise gone unnoticed. Throughout this project, we've determined that the method works and it can also be rolled out on a geographical scale based on resources and volunteers. Volunteers require no previous knowledge of HWA, which makes it a great community science program. It also resulted in the reports to EdMaps and iNaturalist. The trap deployment timeframe we targeted captured the timing of ovisacs, wool crawlers, and winged adelgids. So we'll be targeting that same timeframe again this year. The workshops were evidently helpful as we only received questions from volunteers that were unable to attend. So we had about 30 out of 50 participants attend a workshop. And similarly, any mistakes made by volunteers were also made by those who were unable to attend the workshops. So we'll be adding more visuals to the protocol to kind of help with this. Our volunteers consisted of municipal and conservation authority staff and professionals in the field, but also woodlot owners and general members of the public. So producing more resources to make it as accessible as possible has always been a goal, but we wanted to start with that really robust protocol during the pilot year. So next steps, we have opened registration for 2024 with an additional 50 traps to offer, targeting Southwestern Ontario this year. Participants from 2023 will also redeploy their traps and we'll be sending them those refill kits. We will also be closely observing research from Dr. Charlene Partridge's lab in their work on quantifying infestation levels and determining the stability of eDNA, as well as phenology research from Dr. Chris McCory's lab at CFS to help refine the protocol and timing. We also sent out a survey to participants for feedback, which was really well received. So there were no surprises, which is great. Many expressed their excitement to be able to participate in something like this. And any constructive feedback that we did receive were things that we were already working on, like the addition of visuals, that we were producing a video, as well as digestible one-pager protocol to kind of help make it more accessible. And there's also other resources in the works that are being developed, like a land manager's guide as well. And then something that we're really excited about is expanding the monitoring network with new partners into other provinces. So for the upcoming 2024 season, we're working with Prince Edward Island Invasive Species Council to recruit volunteers and PEI. And we're also discussing with other partners in other provinces as well. So really excited for that. And that's it for me. If you are looking to learn more about the monitoring network, you can find it through our community science program page on our website. And if you're interested in obtaining a trap, please sign up and register. There's both the Ontario and PEI registration pages up there with the QR code and the links. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Derissa. And we do just have one question, it looks like. Although if there are any more, we do have a few minutes, so please put them in the Q&A. We have a question. There are a number of insects that resemble Hemlock woolly adelgid. how north, I guess, is the trees range in Ontario? I think someone was saying they maybe saw one in Temagami.
Yeah, so the tree range, here's a distribution of hemlock on the right here. So, I mean, I live in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, kind of right in the kind of middle of the Great Lakes there. And there's plenty of hemlock trees up here still. So I hope that that helps with the range distribution on hemlock. HWA distribution, like I said, right now, this also shows where the confirmed detections are. But as we know with climate change and warming temperatures, milder winters, we might see it continue to expand across the distribution of hemlock trees. So really cold temperatures like a polar vortex has been shown to kind of cut its infestation levels back. But there's so many on one tree that even if it bounces it back to like 99%, that 1% can easily quickly spread again because it reproduces asexually. So it'll be interesting to see how it continues to expand its range.
Okay. And we have another one in the Q&A. What size of forest and percentage of hemlock are you looking for apart from the location of the forest for eDNA traps?
Yeah, so right now, like I said, the only criteria is really that you have a hemlock. You can sign up even if you just have one single hemlock tree in your backyard. That being said, there are questions in the registration page that ask you to describe your stand, which will just help us if we get more requests for traps than what the number of traps that we can distribute, then we might start prioritizing larger stands, older stands, high priority areas, things like that. So I guess the answer is it depends on how big of a request we get.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Derissa. It looks like that's all the questions we have for you. So I think we will move on to our next speaker.
Yeah.
So next up, we do have Cassidy Egerdeen coming to us from the city of Mississauga, and she's going to be speaking to us today on volunteer management.
Bear with me one moment here.
No problem. Take your time.
Great. Does everything look okay?
Yes, we can see it now. Go ahead.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk at this forum and talk about the City of Mississauga's Natural Area Stewardship Program. Before I get into my presentation too much, I just want to highlight the importance of volunteer engagement, especially in the context of invasive species management. Having a volunteer program that focuses on managing invasive species is really important because it creates awareness, especially within the volunteers that are working with you to manage and control invasive species. Through our programs, I've had a lot of volunteers that come out and help us manage different plants, and many times they've noted that they had no idea that the plant that we're working to manage is invasive. And so it helps to create that education and awareness, which then empowers people to start managing and thinking about invasive species management on their own private property. So even though they're doing the work on public property, in our case, they can then take that information home and share it and use it on their own property and share it with their neighbors and their neighborhood, if need be. As many of us who work in invasive species have probably experienced, different organizations have different capacities for doing this sort of work. In Mississauga, we have over 500 parks and over 160 of those are natural areas. And so having volunteers help us do this work increases our capacity to do so because we have a relatively small team dedicated to cover that area. And having volunteers help us do the work increases how much ground that we're able to cover. There's also a ton of ecological benefits that I'm not going to go into too much detail on. And it's also really rewarding for volunteers to do this type of work, especially for invasive species. It's really clear your before and after of the effort that you've put in. And so a lot of volunteers really enjoy it from that perspective. So the City of Mississauga's Natural Area Stewardship Volunteer Program has three main goals. The first is to empower Mississauga's residents to take action on managing invasive species, and we're doing this by providing them with training, giving them the tools, and giving them a context of why the work they're doing is so important so that they can make a difference in natural areas in their community. To do this, we're hoping to connect Mississauga residents to certain activities that are meaningful to them. Right now, this program is focused on invasive species management, but we're looking to expand it to other stewardship opportunities. And so through that, we're hoping that our residents will find an activity that they really enjoy and that is really important to them. And then they can apply that to the natural area that they walk through with their dog or their family every single day, and expand it beyond just whatever activity it is that they're working on, and start to think about other impacts to that natural area. And overall, we really just want to build a volunteer base to help steward Mississauga's natural areas. Right now, we have a really strong tree planting program, and we have a lot of volunteer interest in that. And so we're looking to get more volunteers involved with other aspects of the team that we work on. So the program really started in 2018, and it was focused solely on garlic mustard removal, and it was called the Garlic Mustard Task Force. It started with just 5 volunteers working in 2 parks within Mississauga, and they spent 27 hours removing 26 bags of garlic mustard, which is pretty incredible for a small group of people. In 2019, the program continued on a much smaller scale. 2 volunteers kind of came back to do the work and didn't actively track their hours in the same way that we have been tracking it across the rest of the program. But there also was a one-time event with 11 people who came out to that event to learn more about garlic mustard. 2020, the program didn't happen because of COVID-19, and then the program really took off in 2021 and continued to increase in 2022. And so garlic mustard really only has 2.5 months or so to actively control it. And so we had this really dedicated group of volunteers that we wanted to offer more opportunity to beyond just the spring season. And so in February of 2023, during Invasive Species Awareness Week, we introduced our Natural Area Stewardship Volunteer Program, which I'm going to call the NAS program from here on out. And this program really was just to offer expanded opportunities to build off of that momentum and that interest from our Garlic Mustard Task Force and carry it on throughout the year, and also to develop a volunteer base for some of our public-facing events. And so we introduced the program with these 4 opportunities, one of which is still Garlic Mustard Task Force, and we break it down into individual and staff-led opportunities. So the individual opportunities are really for people who want to go out into parks and woodlands and natural areas across Mississauga and kind of pick away at an area on their own or with a friend or a family member, and we provide them with all the training that they might need on how to identify the plant that they're removing, any hazardous plants, anything to be aware of when they're working in a natural area. We give them supplies and we direct them to what locations we want them to be working in, because we've vetted those areas and made sure that they're safe for volunteers to be working in on their own. And so we have kept the Garlic Mustard Task Force as part of that. And so that's really focused to the spring season. And then during the summer months, we've introduced invasive ground cover removals, which is from July to September. And I'll get into all of these in a little bit more detail in a couple slides. Then we have our staff-led events, which gives volunteers the opportunity to work alongside city staff as well as other volunteers and other members of the public. And really any sort of direction is given to our volunteers at the beginning of the event by city staff. So they are provided with whatever direction they need, and city staff bring the equipment that they need to do the work that is planned. And then they'll take all of that equipment back at the end of the day. So that includes our public-facing invasive species events, as well as staff-led work days throughout the summer and the fall. And so I just want to give kind of an honorable mention to our volunteer management system. And so this is kind of what allows us to keep track of all of our volunteers. It's a program called Better Impact, and this is kind of what it looks like right now because our applications are closed. And so this platform is really great because we're able to build an application form that has whatever sort of relevant questions that are needed for our program, so people can select what parks they want to work in from a list, for example, where they want to work, when they're available, that sort of thing. This program is really great because it stores all of the volunteer information. And so at the city, we require volunteers to fill out certain forms, and then they can upload all of their forms through this system, and then we can go in and check to make sure that they filled them out correctly. We're also able to send email templates out for certain key milestones within each kind of sub-program. And then we're also able to assign volunteers to different activities. So for example, we could assign a volunteer to working in Arundel Park is one of our parks in Mississauga. And then they would be able to go in and track their hours and the work that they're doing directly to Arundel Park. So at the end of the day, we could go in and say, okay, over the course of the spring, volunteers dedicated however many hours, removed so many garbage bags of X plant, and be able to summarize it on a park by park basis, as well as the overall program. And this volunteer program can also, the volunteer management system, can also store any sort of documents, so reference guides and that sort of thing that might be relevant to our volunteers. Okay, so just getting into our specific opportunities. So I've already kind of touched on this one a little bit, but the first one is our garlic mustard task force, which again is focused on managing garlic mustards in woodlands, parks, and natural areas. So we provide all the training that's needed. So our volunteers are required to attend a webinar that talks about an overview of the program, what they can be expected to do, how to ID garlic mustard, how to properly remove it, how to secure it in a garbage bag so that it can get picked up from parks, how to use our mapping, all that sort of thing. And then they have to attend an in-person training session. So this is just to verify that they've really taken in the information that we presented to them during the webinar, and just make sure that they know how to identify garlic mustard. And then once that's kind of completed, we provide them with their supplies, and then they're kind of off to the races to do the work. The volunteers are able to pick a park that they want to work in. We do have a predetermined list, and each of those parks has a certain number of days associated that the volunteer can work in them. And this is mostly based off of when the garbage gets picked up. So volunteers can typically work in a park a day or two before the garbage gets picked up, just so that garbage bags aren't sitting in parks for too long. Or in some cases, if a volunteer is really passionate about working at a certain park, we do give them the option to work at a park if they would like to. That's not on our list. And then so we have our invasive ground cover removals, which is basically formed off of the groundwork or the framework for the garlic mustard task force, but this is focused on invasive ground covers such as periwinkle, winter creeper, and English ivy. And this is really great to do in the summertime because often these plants are growing in shaded woodlands where it's a lot nicer to kind of sit on the ground and pick away at these species rather than being out in the sun. So this happens over the summer months to carry on the momentum of the garlic mustard task force. And then we have our staff-led work days and our staff-led events. So our events are typically for larger groups of volunteers. So we're looking typically for 5 to 20 volunteers, and these are typically taking place on the weekends, generally on Saturday mornings. Then we have our staff-led work days. So the idea behind these is that volunteers can come out and work alongside staff when they're undertaking kind of regularly planned work. And we're looking to invite 3 to 5 volunteers to kind of have it be an extra helping hand for that event. And so these are typically happening during the workday, which is during the week. So Monday to Friday. And we typically set this up with like a morning shift so that people could attend that, or an afternoon shift. And then we tried to kind of rotate it based off throughout the week and not offering the same park at the same time every single time, so that we would have a different variety of people coming out to these events. And so this program definitely could not run without engaging other groups within the city of Mississauga. So we rely pretty heavily on our marketing and communication team to promote our program and produce materials for our program. So for example, our volunteers wear these ID badges so that when they're working out in parks, people can identify them. We used to have the stickers, which is the bright yellow piece on the bottom, so that people could also identify that the garbage bags were coming from our program. We're going to be moving away from that to reduce waste. But we also rely on our community centers for extra supplies. So our volunteers are given kind of a determined number of garbage bags at the start of the program. And if they run out for whatever reason, they can then go to their local community center to pick up extras rather than having to kind of come to one central location, which sounds like a small thing, but it does reduce a lot of staff administration time trying to coordinate when volunteers can come pick up their extra supplies. And then we also rely very heavily on our park staff. So they're the ones who are actually picking up the garbage bags of plant material from our parks. They're also helping us to identify potential sites where work would be beneficial. And they also are promoting our program because they're the ones who are out in the parks more often, talking about the work that's taking place. And so I want to say that our program has been really, really successful. This is how the programs have changed over time. Again, before 2022, everything is related to Garlic Mustard Task Force, and in 2023, it grew. And so in 2023, we really, for Garlic Mustard Task Force, had a lot of goals set out because we had predetermined information or historic information on the garlic mustard program. And so we were looking for 60 volunteers. We didn't quite get there, but that's okay because the program as a whole grew and we had a lot more volunteers participate, focused on other things other than just garlic mustard. And so we were looking for our volunteers to remove 450 bags of garlic mustard, and they definitely did that, which is awesome. And we were looking for them to work in 25 woodlands, which we hit the goal on that, which is fantastic. For ground cover removals, we really just wanted 15 volunteers to participate in the program because it was new, and we were kind of happy with whatever those 15 volunteers were able to do, and we were able to get 20 people involved in the program, which was fantastic. For staff-led events, we didn't really necessarily have a key goal, but for those staff-led work days, we hosted or put out 15 events, and 9 of them were attended, which was a pretty good turnout. We weren't sure what the uptake for that sort of event was going to be. And then we also hosted 10 public events over the length of 2023 and had at least 5 volunteers come to each of them, which we were very happy to see. So overall, all of the work in Mississauga accounted by volunteers accounted to just under 850 hours worth of volunteer time, which is amazing. So just quickly going over some lessons learned and next steps to wrap up here. So we learned that it's really important to streamline application windows. So our applications were open basically from the end of February last year until the end of August, and we had a lot of people apply, but we only had about 23% of those people actually follow through all of the steps that were required and actively participate in the program. So having set volunteer windows matched up to when each program component is starting, I think would be really beneficial. Last year we had our volunteers start actually tracking the work that they were doing to specific like polygons or areas. And so now we can follow up on that work and direct volunteers next year to those same areas, especially in the case of garlic mustard, to make sure that that same patch is being managed over time. And one key piece that I learned through this program is to really reduce the options for extra time. So sometimes you'll have volunteers that are coming in late to the program and they're asking us for special accommodation. Unfortunately, I found that a lot of times those volunteers are not following through, and really the volunteers that are applying early right off the bat are the ones that are going to keep moving through with the program. And so it's worthwhile to focus your time on that. So for next steps, we're looking to expand our program to include stewarding of our tree planting areas, so things like mulching and watering, and looking into other stewardship opportunities. We're looking to create some more resources for our volunteers, such as like a frequently asked question document, just to reduce the amount of time that staff have to spend administrating the program and answering the same questions over and over again. Learning to better utilize the volunteer program or portal, sorry. I just attended a training on that, so I'm hoping to utilize some of those tips and tricks I learned. And then focusing more targeted advertising to ensure that our volunteers are working at areas where we're not seeing as much volunteer uptake as we would like to. So that's kind of where we'd like to see the program go. So I will wrap up there, and I'm happy to take any questions. And there is my email there if you have any questions or anything you'd like to follow up on.
Okay, great presentation. Thank you so much, Cassidy. We do have lots of questions, which unfortunately we won't be able to get to all of them. We have just over 2 minutes, but maybe we'll get through what we can. First one, did you hope to have a minimum area or percentage of coverage done by volunteers for each year, or are the removal locations pretty general?
The locations are pretty general. Mostly we're just looking for areas that are safe for volunteers to work in within a park. We have a lot of areas that are close to creeks or on slopes or that sort of thing. So we're trying to avoid having our volunteers working in those areas. So we're kind of just happy to have people picking away at the areas that we've identified. There isn't a specific goal in terms of coverage.
Okay. And what has been one of the biggest challenges for you operating this? And do you have advice for other cities, maybe that are smaller and have fewer resources?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the biggest challenge is kind of knowing when to cut it off a little bit. So I think we had a lot of interest, and when I first started this program, I was really focused on trying to make sure that people kind of stuck it through and were participating in the program. And I found that I was chasing people and really trying to nudge them to get them involved. And what I've learned since then is really focus on the people who are coming to you and doing the minimum training requirements and who are truly trying to push through on their own. It's not worth chasing people, and start small, like just focus on one park in particular that you're interested in having the work done, and it'll grow from there over time. But start with like a trial area first or a trial park first, and then go from there.
Okay. We just have like 30 seconds left if you can maybe answer this one quickly. But what sort of management tactics are you using to manage periwinkle in woodlands?
So it's just hand pulling. So we have them hand pull an area, and we have all of the areas mapped out so we can go back and check. And we're expecting in the first year that there will be a pretty big reduction, and then hoping to direct people to those same areas next year to do any touch up and pull any straggling things that might be there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again so much. And there are still some questions in the Q&A. If you are able to type in an answer, feel free to do so. If not, we will have your email in the chat for folks to email you.
Great, sounds good. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Cassidy. I want to bring up our next, this is our final speaker in this session. We have Megan Weber coming to us from the University of Minnesota. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Emily. Are you ready for me to? Oh, are you ready for me to go? Okay.
Yeah, go right ahead.
In true fashion, my computer just popped up a screen that I have an unstable internet connection. So if things go wonky, just let me know. But I'm going to hope that it stays stable enough. All right. Let me share my screen. Great. So I'm Megan Weber. I'm an extension educator focusing on aquatic invasive species at the University of Minnesota. And we created an event called Starry Trek back in 2017. And I'm going to share about that one today. So this is kind of how it started. Starry stonewort is the macroalgae, the kind of green stringy thing you see in the photo. And it was a new aquatic invasive species to Minnesota in 2015, where it had been found in one lake and an attached portion to it as well. And the following year in 2016, there had been kind of this flurry of new discoveries, and they came about in 2 different parts of the state. And that left us kind of wondering, where else in the state might this be? It was a species that there hadn't been a lot of outreach about yet. It looks like a lot of, like green planty things that you might find in the water. And we thought it was possible that it was in even more lakes and that it just hadn't been reported or recognized that time. So we're trying to think on a way that we could, have this really big effort to search across the state. And Minnesota being the land of 10,000 lakes, we have many water bodies to try to search. And, not that many, at least paid professionals across the state to manage it. But it turned out that at kind of that same time, our colleagues in Wisconsin were interested in doing something similar. They had been hosting an event called Snapshot Day there that focused on invasive species detection and river crossings. And Extension over there was really interested in building on that and adding lake monitoring protocols, which is what we were kind of talking about doing. So we teamed up and created monitoring protocols for lakes that we both use now, and each hold our own dates. So we have partnerships now across our organizations, and we work with the Department of Natural Resources in each of our states who do, all the final verification and help hold training sometimes, and are real critical partners to making this event happen. So we each have this event in Minnesota. It's called Starry Trek. In Wisconsin, they have AIS Snapshot Day, but we still coordinate every year to have this big thing happen on the same date. And, we'll promote each other's events, especially for folks who live kind of along the border, that they have two ways that they could participate. And it's also critical that we have local partners. So at the University of Minnesota, we're doing the statewide coordination for this event, but we rely on local partners to host all these local training sites for volunteers to appear at, to receive training, to get equipment, and then to ultimately go and do the local monitoring so we can get as much coverage as possible across the state. So there's a shot of where all we had local partners that help bring the event to their area of Minnesota on the screen. And I'd mentioned the sampling procedures that we started. So we hand make all of the sampling equipment. When we started out, we bought from the local hardware store hundreds of wooden handled rakes and sawed off the handles and created these. And we share those out across to all of our sampling partners so that they have the equipment that they need. And then the protocols that we have set up provide for 5 sampling points at each public water access. So, it varies depending on the access. And for the example here, there's, like 2 docks and there's this big public swimming area. But some places are very narrow. So they just do their best to evenly space 5 points out across whatever the public space is. And then volunteers are tossing these sampling rakes into the water, pulling it in and sorting through the plants to look for something that might be starry stonewort or any other aquatic invasive species. Volunteers bring back then anything that they're unsure of or suspect might be an aquatic invasive species to that local partner who's hosting the training site. And they do another pass through and will look anything that they're not confident in or think might also be an invasive species. They then submit a report to DNR, and anything that they're able to identify as a native species, then they can let that volunteer know what it is and not have to worry about passing that one along. And we do have an online training now. Thanks to the pandemic, everything came online, but it was this really great resource we learned, and people really appreciated being able to get some training in advance. So if you want to go through and see the full training protocols, you can there's a Z link there, that shortened link that goes to our YouTube channel, and we have a playlist that has all the training videos for this program. So this is what a volunteer would need to know and expect to do when they participate in Starry Trek. We're also working with researchers at the university who have done some work on modeling for risk when we're creating the routes that we send people onto. And we're working then with the risk modeling, so trying to send people to the highest risk lakes first with like the highest priority. We work with the local coordinators who have really good local information about where, which lakes are maybe the most popular, or if there's lakes that they're doing a lot of monitoring at their own and they'd really like volunteers to be able to get to some of the other ones, that information all gets fed in when we're creating the routes. We factor in things like drive time, and then of course the infested waters list, that we're not sending people to a lake or a river that has aquatic invasive species and then sending it to one that doesn't immediately afterwards. So all those things factor in when we're creating these routes for folks to go and do in their monitoring. And then these are the volunteers who make it happen. We get anywhere from like 4 to 30 people at a site, depending on, where it is in the state. Sometimes their furry companions come along too. And it's the groups that we're most grateful for making this event happen and everything that they're able to discover. And this is kind of a snapshot of what that looks like. I highlighted 2020 because that was, a year of note. Though it maybe didn't impact our numbers as much. We had a fewer volunteers. The benefit of this program is it happens in late summer and it's entirely outdoors, and it also happens in like small groups of people. So like, 2 to 4. So it can be limited to like family units who are doing things on their own. So it was a good event to be able to host during a pandemic, allowing people to be outside and within small family units as they did everything. But we have over 200 people across the state who participate each year, and we're able to get to, between like 200 and 300 public accesses each year that are getting searched for new aquatic invasive species. And this is what volunteers have found. We launched in 2017, so this is 2017 through 2023. And volunteers have found 4 new populations of starry stonewort, that species that spurred the whole idea. But they found a lot else as well. There's been a new zebra mussel population, a few new Eurasian water milfoil populations, a couple of corbicula or freshwater golden clam populations, which were a really interesting find for Minnesota in an inland lake where there wasn't any like hot water input. Curleaf pondweed, purple loosestrife, and then invasive mystery snails have been the most reported thing, at least new reports. And all of these are reports for a new population that hadn't existed in the state's database for aquatic invasive species. We also have a new map up. So if you'd like to see, what efforts look like, there's another shortened link here or a QR code that you can scan and kind of explore what it looks like across Minnesota. All the little dots are locations that a volunteer has visited and done the work. And then each of the triangles with the colorful circle around them are the spots where a new aquatic invasive species has been found. And let's see. Okay, and I'm realizing that I started my timer too early. So I think I'm done with lots of time for questions. So I'll note my my colleagues who helped make this program happen too, Dan Larkin and Michelle Isaacson, and all the various ways that you can reach me if you have questions. And maybe I can at least minimize this and see what Q&As are, and I can always revisit some of the slides if needed too.
Thanks so much, Megan. Yeah, great presentation. If you're finished, that leaves us with plenty of time for questions. So if you had a question that you wanted to put in the Q&A, please do so, because we can almost definitely get around to it. I will read out the first one for you. How do you ensure that invasive species are not being moved by your program? Are volunteers told to treat their gear between sampling locations?
Yes, that's a great question. So aside from, we have the routes that we send out that we're all setting up to reduce that risk by ensuring that we're not having people visit a water body that we know has an aquatic invasive species in it before they go to another. But yes, they're also cleaning equipment in between each site. So that's part of the training that they'll receive. And I think you should be able to see that if you wanted to visit that YouTube channel. So they receive a towel and like a boot brush with a brush and a pick on it. And usually either clean water or a way to like dip or rinse the rake between each site. So they're given all of the tools that they need to make sure that they're not spreading in between each site, and are instructed to use that between stops.
Okay. We have someone asking if a Canadian student wanted to come down and work or share information, is that helpful? I guess, is there like kind of a cross exchange, anything like that?
Like if a student wanted to come and participate in the event, or?
That was, I read out the question almost word for word, so I'm not sure about additional context there.
Yeah, I'll answer assuming it's wanting to participate in the event. And if that's wrong, then maybe that person can just chime in and let me know. But yeah, if you want to participate, you absolutely can register and join. We do have a location every year up at Lake of the Woods. So depending on, what part of Canada you're coming from, maybe not too far of a drive to hit that location up. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe if that doesn't answer their question, they'll email you. Okay, where can we find the online identification training?
Yeah, I'll drop a link into chat if I can. Here we go. Okay, so I just dropped a link into chat, and that brings you to our YouTube channel. And we have, if you go to the playlist there, you'll see one for Starry Trek, and one of the videos there has identification training in it.
Okay, great, thank you. Our, I think, last question, unless people want to add in more, how does the location-specific risk assessment work? What was the methodology?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So I'll preface this with saying I am not one of the researchers who did the risk assessment work, but I will happily grab the links to those papers and put them into chat. There's two that we use. The first one was done by Ranjan Muthakrishnan, and he did, I believe it's oh, I'm going to forget the term for it. But he did modeling that was looking at water quality and used that to help prioritize risk. And the other one is done through Minnesota has a program called the AIS Explorer that links in like boat connectivity and connections of like boat traffic or water connections based on infestation status, and uses that to help get risk. So we have those two models that we use to kind of prioritize where we're sending people. And I'll find the links for those papers and put them into chat.
Great, yeah, that would be appreciated. I don't see anything else in the Q&A, so I think that wraps up our session. Thank you so much, Megan, for presenting. And I will just note that we will be here for part 2 of this session at 3:30. So please join us again for Education Outreach and Community Science part 2.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.